Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guests, editors Arielle Zakowski and Austin Keeling, join us to talk about their work on Missing. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Furthermore, please note this episode was recorded in February before the release of the film was pushed in the UK. So sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Arielle and Austin. Hi, Arielle and Austin. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for having us.
No, I'm really excited to have you guys on to talk about Missing. I'm happy that Gabby managed to sort something out between us. I know it's been a bit of back and forth with timings and whatnot, and also having the availability of seeing the film because it's not out in the UK just yet. But don't worry, I've seen it, so I'm not going to just like freestyle questions based on a trailer. So we will talk about spoilers about what happens and whatnot. But I'm excited to dive into the editing process of the movie. Already had the opportunity to talk to Will, one of the directors, and also Kelly, the production designer. So this is kind of like the last of the trifecta sort of thing.
Oh, nice.
Of
That's fun.
interviews. So it's quite cool to see. It would be quite cool to discuss basically one crew member who's there from like pre-production to production stage, another person who's there from the embryonic stage to the screen stage, and then we'll have the final stage of where all of it comes together with you guys.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess we start at the beginning. How did the project come about for you two?
Who knows?
How did it come about? Well, it's funny that you mentioned, the different roles as kind of covering different parts of the process, because typically on a normal movie, that's the case. Like as editors, we wouldn't come on until basically just before production was beginning. But on this film, we actually began 6 to 8 months before production started. So we were one of the first, I think, kind of like main roles that were hired after Nick and Will, the writer directors, had started putting the script together. So as far as how it came about, a lot of the people working on this film kind of were friends or knew of each other from film school days and had all sort of kept in touch. I think various duos had worked together before in different capacities. And so we had been big fans of Searching, and Austin actually had worked for a little bit on the first film during the localization phase when they were like scrubbing all the text and adapting it for different countries. So he had some experience there. I think we both had gone to test screenings of Searching. So we kind of like knew what the deal was. And then we were super excited when Nick and Will called us up and asked if now that, they edited the first film and now we're writing and directing the second one. And so we became the editors for this one. So we were super excited.
It's quite interesting to hear you guys joining on so early on because, as you say, you start a few weeks before principal photography and then kind of go from there. But I guess starting so early on, you must get so involved. Like your pre-production must be so different to I don't want to say conventional film because but as a film that is
traditionally shot.
You're traditionally shot, yes, thank you, and has not so much sort of in-screen action.
Yeah, we actually, the first day we started putting together a rough version of the movie. And that's what we spent the first 6 months before they shot, was making a previs, essentially like an animatic of the film, just to kind of get it on its feet and feel what was working and what wasn't. So we were just taking screenshots on our computers from home, and Nick and Will were sending images of them for us to slot in as kind of placeholders for the footage. And we were all just recording ourselves saying the lines, and we made a fully watchable version of the movie, really low res, really rough around the edges, but before they shot anything. And that was actually really fun to be involved so early because they were still finishing the script at the time. So we were able to really inform kind of the final section of writing by seeing like, oh, this needs some work, or this needs to be changed in some way, and they were able to see what we were putting together and adjust the script as needed.
So you kind of in a way were workshopping your ideas and then seeing what kind of come about from it. I think that's quite cool that you guys were able to basically shoot the film, put it together, and then, as you were saying, that like taking bits and bobs that might not work and might work. But then whilst you're doing that, do you also add in the sort of in-screen action as well, or are you just going by what's being captured by the devices around the house?
No, that the animatic that we made was fully kind of like essentially what you're seeing in the finished film, but a much, much, much rougher version of it. So when we say that we like kind of put together this rough version of the film, we really do mean like we're kind of roughing out all the computer screen stuff and animating it in kind of a real basic way. And then obviously we didn't have footage yet of the actors, so we're just slotting in like as if you would have a storyboard, but it's just like a still image of someone like this. And then we sort of kind of rough out for timing purposes, for creative purposes, to like figure out what's working, what's not. There were certain sequences that were really kind of like invented in this stage, namely kind of like the more montagey sequences where it wasn't necessarily scripted out beat for beat. And so Austin and I, along with Nick and Will, spent a lot of time kind of like brainstorming and trying things and getting it to the point so that when production was starting, they could use this as a point of reference and be like, okay, in this scene, you know, we're going to need our lead actress, Storm Reed, to look to the left when she says this line, because we already kind of know that that's where that will happen. And so it helped with eye lines and like kind of figuring out how to shoot the characters for the footage that would then be replaced into the FaceTime windows and WhatsApp chats and all that. And then, you know, for those more montagey sequences, it kind of helped them figure out what they would film. And then obviously once production happened, we then took all the temp footage and lines of us acting everything out terribly out, and then replaced it with our much, much better actors' performances and lines. And then at that point, it kind of turned into a more traditional editing process. The directors and producers would come sit with us every day for months and months and months. And, you know, it moved slower than a traditional edit because every time you make a change, you have 20 to 40 layers of graphics to animate along with it. But yeah, it was sort of an essential, like if we had just started on day one of the shoot with like blank timelines, it would have been, I think, a nightmare to try to like put all the basics of the graphics there and all the takes and performance selection. So it helped us also kind of be like, okay, we have the backbone of it, and now we're going to work on just performance. And then once we have all those things together, now we can look at it kind of more holistically and work through, you know, story things and everything that comes up when you're editing.
Going by your answer in terms of having, when you're sitting there with producers, directors, and then making those small changes, that sounds extremely sort of painful, and it obviously would be time consuming as well, but then also the attention to detail that actually needs to go into what you have on screen and then the additional graphics that go into it.
Yeah, like imagine, you know, like the easiest stuff was like, oh, can we find another take? You know, that was easy. You just switch out a take. But if they'd say like, oh, maybe she should click on this app and foreground it and then click on something else, suddenly we're juggling 40 different graphics and completely animating things. And so each little note ended up taking a lot longer than if we were just working with footage.
And we were doing this all in Premiere. Like we just used Adobe Premiere to edit, and we kind of lived in the Adobe ecosystem from day 0 to day 3,000, however many days we're on this. So we were really like, a lot of when we say animating, it's really kind of a basic like keyframing things and moving it from A to B. And like we would have a graphic that was just the mouse pointer. And so anytime she's clicking around, we're literally just like putting a keyframe, putting another keyframe, animating it from point A to point B to like simulate a mouse clicking around on the screen. So all of that, along with timing and again, like story, character, all that was happening kind of in this very prolonged editing process.
So when you're talking about like putting in like the cursor, for example, when they said, oh, instead of going right to left, it should be left to right, you would have your scene playing out with Storm Reed, the lead, moving the sort of mouse, but then you guys would have to animate it yourself. And then, so just to add as well, did the editing software by using Adobe Pro, is that something that you guys chose over other softwares because it would enhance your work and be able to make it a little bit easier rather than using, say, for example, Final Cut?
Yeah, we from the very beginning knew we wanted to stick with Adobe. That's what they used on the first one. And we definitely leaned on Nick and Will's experience having edited a screen movie like this before to help us come up with a workflow. But we knew because none of this is screen recorded, it's all elements that are created by our team to look like a screen. We knew we would be using Illustrator, another Adobe software, to make these elements, and that we knew we would be finishing in After Effects. So it just made sense to keep it all within the Adobe world and work in Premiere. Plus, I think Arielle and I just prefer Premiere. It's our choice.
Your go-to software. What I'm curious to know about as well, because you were mentioning about early on when you recorded yourselves and built the previs, there's an element of bias in the film in terms of how things are being shown. So you as an audience member will think one thing whilst actually what's being shown is meant another thing, and that's sort of peppered in the film. You see that with what happens on Twitter when more gets revealed about Grace and how there's a secret, and then you see Storm Reed's character get quite upset about it. Because you've had that advantage of knowing the script in and out and building it up through previs and sort of acting out yourself and putting it on the timeline, how did you go about sort of like tightening that and then also not revealing too much in the story in the edit?
Yeah, that was a constant thing that we were aware of and thinking of and trying to find that perfect balance of. I think one of the things that we did a lot of was have test screenings. So we would kind of invite anywhere from like 10 to 30 friends, family members, whatever, who had no idea what the story was as we were editing to come and watch. So maybe like once a month at a certain point. And we would play them the really kind of like low res, rough version of the film, and then make them stay another 2 hours afterwards and ask them like 100 questions about, okay, were you ahead of this reveal? Were you behind this? Did this make sense? Like, was this justified? And kind of like relied a lot on those fresh perspectives to tell us whether or not we were tipping our hand too much or we were like catching people by surprise in like a negative way. One of the things that I know was a constant thing we were playing with was early on in the film, there's a party sequence, but during that sequence, June is being sent photos. She's being texted photos of her mom and her boyfriend on vacation. And we did a lot of like testing with, are we showing the photos too long? Are we showing them not enough? Or are there too many photos that are too revealing? Because the photos end up, being kind of important later on. And it really was like thanks to test screening and just like hearing people's feedback that we kind of landed on what we thought was the right balance of all of that. But it's true, like especially with a film like this where there's a ton of twists and turns, like once you know the story and you can never put that back in the bottle. And so we kept needing to find people that didn't know what was going to happen, and like basically they were our guinea pigs. So thank you to all those people that kept watching it.
What's interesting too is that then in the later stages, there are a lot of Easter eggs kind of hidden throughout the film that like give away the answers or say some of the twists. Like there are texts coming from her friends that are suggesting maybe this is what's going on. And it's funny because it is like a chance to really push the boundaries there and kind of like straddle the line of like how much can you bring the audience almost to the point of knowing what's going on without fully giving it away. But if you dig around, there's the solution is there from pretty early on.
I think as well, because it's such a visual film, but you can kind of get away with having the text there in front of the audience because there's so much to look at, because you want to see what's on the screen, you want to see the performances. And I think that's why something like the Searching, when it first came out, these are the sort of films that warrant repeat viewing, because you, even though, as you said, you know the story and you can't put it back in a box, but you could start picking up the jigsaw pieces and putting them in those sort of areas where you think, oh wait, that's in this scene this happens, in that scene this happens. It's the same when searching, when you see the photo of the criminal and then in the background is the police officer. But it's so great, it's so well done in terms of it's there right in front of you. It was there all along, but it's just so well peppered in that you can't tell until you see it again.
Totally. Yeah. I think that was like a lot of fun for our whole team, was kind of how much can we put right in front of you without you noticing it. And then also, like, there's a whole massive slew of Easter eggs everywhere in this film. There's whole other storylines going on in the background. And I think, you know, we're like controlling where the shots are, and we're sort of like directing your eye in certain places. But if you resist that, and I do think this is something that's better for a second viewing, but if you kind of fight against where we're telling you to look and instead look other places, there's like a lot to catch.
It's the same with like the alien story. That's also shown up in both Searching and Missing. And I think the use of technology is, because technology has changed so much since the release of Searching, that now in Missing you've got your doorbell that has a camera on it. You have, you know, extra traffic cameras. You have, lack of a better term, kids having more access to cameras in terms of webcam, their phones, even like your watch, which I had no idea had that, and then also security cameras that people can buy. How much of an impact did all of this technology have whilst you're editing, and how much did you want to sort of use it to tell the story whilst cutting it, but not use too much of each tool?
Yeah, I mean, most of that stuff was there in the script. And I know Nick and Will were definitely trying to take what Searching had started and push it and really reflect the time we're living in right now with all of these different modes of technology. But one of the things that was definitely on our minds when we were editing was that whereas the first film was a dad who was maybe not so ingrained in all this technology looking for his daughter, this was a teenage girl who has access and has a lot more familiarity with all of these different forms of technology. So we definitely tried to keep that in mind and keep it grounded in a realistic, like, what would a teenager actually have access to in this type of thing. But that informed everything from how much we were like using different apps, her phone, her watch, but also how quickly we were cutting, how quickly we were animating the mouse. You know, we were definitely trying to make sure that we were sticking true to the experience of someone who is younger using technology today.
But you're right that these films do become a time capsule of technology. Like, you watch Searching now and you're like, oh my God, all this stuff used to look like iChat or messages, whatever, used to look like that. That's crazy. And I feel like now it'll be like in a year, maybe two, I feel like we'll watch Missing and be like, oh my God, did stuff really look like that? But it is cool to kind of capture it in that way.
The editing process took so long that that all of the Mac software updated like twice while we were editing it. So it changed the look of it. We had to keep changing it to keep it current. So at some point we were just like, listen, it's set in 2022. This is what things looked like. We have to end it. But
yeah, every time there was a new update, we'd be like, oh my God, we have to change everything. Slight nightmare, but we made it through.
Made it.
Imagine that, like, oh, perfect, we've got the final cut, it's all done. Oh, overnight there's an update. It's like,
yeah,
go back at it again. It's like, oh no. But even so, I think it's quite interesting as well. The point that you make is that you change it from a dad to a younger adult who is going to be a lot more tech savvy. And there's always certain apps that use, you know, it seems very prevalent. It's like the sort of like that sort of age is like the TikTok age, and then there's also some other apps that people might be using. Because it's, maybe this is me showing my age, but it made me laugh a little bit when Storm Reed's character had to download WhatsApp and had to side, and it's like, what's wrong with WhatsApp? Jeez. And use it as a tool to sort of communicate. Whilst you guys were doing your research and cutting the film, what apps did you research and had to sort of have a closer look at to see how they worked and how users were using it in creating these videos?
To be honest, everything. Like, every single app or element of a desktop that you see on the screen in the movie, we recreate it. So nothing, like Austin said, nothing is screen recorded or screenshotted. So every single element was rebuilt by our team and our graphics team from scratch. And so what that meant is that we were constantly trying to be as true to reality as possible, because I think that's what makes the film work so well, is that it really does seem like, in a sense, a lot of times people assume it's screen recorded because it feels real. We recreated it so that we could have all the control over like what the copy said, what website said, how things function, and also so that we could have infinite like resolution, because we're getting quite close to certain apps as we're punching in and creating these shots. But in order to recreate them, we were like tried to recreate everything as pixel perfect as possible. So we would like screen record our computers constantly to find out like how many frames does it take for a notification to slide in when someone's calling you, or like what does the button do when you click it, like what does that click state look like, and every single one of those really really minute details were then recreated either visually or timing wise by us in the edit. So I really do think by the end we knew more about Apple's UI than I think Apple does. There's like a couple things that were like, wow, who knew? Like if you slowed it down and go frame by frame, like I don't think we certainly didn't realize a lot of this stuff was happening, or the way that your cursor changes from being an arrow to being a text typing tool to being a hand with a glove, like depending on what you're over, it just is constantly changing. I think no one's like directly aware of it, or some people are, but I really wasn't.
But yeah.
And so yeah, honestly, all those details, we kind of like everything, the font, we tried to match perfectly and recreating everything. So we really took a look at all these things that we use every day, but never had looked that closely at.
And then there were some things that we didn't use every day, like TikTok. Like I think both of us downloaded TikTok in the early stages of this just to be like, what's going on in the world of the youths?
Yeah, and we're still terrified by it.
Just think like the idea of the attention, the detail that needs to go into the, what's being implemented on the screen is something that I think as an audience member is like can go amiss. But then that's the whole design of this whole screen life and idea of it, because it's just like, wow, you're right in terms of we use these things every day, but we don't actually look at what the sort of type interface is, or how you be typing something out, or even as yourself, like with TikTok, like how this whole app has just exploded over the past couple of years with challenges and people documenting their lives, or people just doing like funny reactions, like the idea of doing these 10-second videos that kind of come and go with people. I think the junior who sits next to me at work uses TikTok, and it's just quite funny to see how for him he could be like, yeah, I could spend a good couple of hours watching it, but then you ask him about watching a film or like a TV show, and it's like sometimes it's just like not really that interested. So it's quite mind-blowing to see that you'd spend a couple of hours on a 10-second videos but not on a 90-minute film, for example.
Yeah, you'd be like, oh, that's too long, I don't have time for that, and then 3 hours later you're still on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, kids these days. I'm curious to know as well, because Will and Nick edited the first film and then they became directors. So they were edited the first film, and now they're directors for Missing. What was it like in the edit suite when you're working with someone who was so close and so close in with the first film, then completely understand the process that you have to go through? Are there things where they helped out a lot, and there were other times where you kind of taught them something new as well?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
It was like honestly like a lifesaver to have them in the room, because Arielle and I were very worried at the first. We were like, how are we going to do this? But what's great is that this whole team, including the producers who were also producers on the first one, and Anish, who produced this, he directed the first one. It's just such a collaborative team, and it really was just so creatively fulfilling to sit in a room with all of these people who know exactly how to tell a story this way, and to bounce ideas off of each other, and to really like everyone, an environment where basically anyone's note is worth trying. So it never felt like, oh, Nick and Will being like, oh, we know how to do it, you have to do it this way. It more felt like this team bringing us in and letting us be part of this collaboration. That being said, there were so many times where we, especially technically, where we were like, please, how do we do this? That they were incredibly helpful to have around.
Yeah. There were a couple, as far as kind of like the workflow, overall, this was the same big picture workflow as the first one, where start with the previs, all in Premiere, all with kind of like temp graphics, and then once we lock, everything sent over to After Effects. All the graphics are replaced with Illustrator. All that was kind of mirroring what they did. I would say like kind of the one big change that we were able to improve upon was the actual editing process, the way that we create our virtual camera shots. Back when they did it, they had to like nest everything and then kind of change how close or far the nest itself was. But we were able to use adjustment layers. I don't know how technical we all want to get here, but I'll keep it brief. Basically using an adjustment layer on top of our stack of all the graphics, and then kind of changing how close or far we were on that, or the positioning of that, which allowed us to move a lot faster. So that was kind of our one contribution to the workflow on this one. But
big. It changed everything in the edit.
It was, yeah. I think it saved a lot of time. And
you can't just knock that one little thing. If it changed, it saved so much time. It's like it's not the cherry on top. You've brought the whole sundae. Everybody else was just the cherry. Let's just
thank you.
Just leave it out there.
We revolutionized it.
Exactly. And when the next people come on to do the next film, you've made it easier for them, and then they'll be like, wow, I can't believe they managed to figure that part out. You were mentioning about workflow. When there's two editors on a film, how do you guys split up the work, and how do you decide to know who's going to cut which scene, or do you sit down together to cut the scenes together and put it all together?
Yeah, I think project to project it might be different. For us on this film, we basically completely tag teamed and shared everything. So by the end, every scene had been passed back and forth between us countless times. We hadn't actually like worked together, hardly had met before this project. So we just, I think, got really lucky that we got along and trusted each other as humans, but also as editors, to know like, okay, if I give you this scene, you're not going to fuck it up. So we kind of, the script was broken up into more or less like 26 sections. And so we used actually Premiere Productions, which kind of functions in a way that it's really easy to pass sequences back and forth. So one of us, we kind of would just tag team. Whoever was like slightly more keen on starting a particular sequence would start that one. And then once you get to a certain point where you're kind of like, okay, I'm losing steam on this one, or I don't know what to do anymore, we would sort of take advantage of having two pairs of eyes on it, and we would then switch. So it was actually really nice to have two people on this, because everything takes longer than it would on a typical edit. So it's nice to have two people tackling it, but also just from kind of the creative point, it was really nice to be able to just like swap when you got to a point in a scene where you're like, I'm so over this, can you please take it? So by the end, it was, a very evenly shared, we both worked on everything.
I think that's quite a big thing, that you guys hadn't really met or worked together before, because I can imagine that like it's quite daunting being like, okay, so I'll do this, you do this, or how you're gonna bring it on. And I guess the way that, because you probably had so much time as well pre-prep to actually understand what needs to be done. But I do like the idea of you guys being like, well, I've run out of steam on here, I'll let you take over, I'm going to work on something else, and vice versa. It probably helps a lot as well to keep what you're doing a little bit fresh, and then also seeing something, as you said, with having a second set of eyes, just going through it and being, oh, we could just tweak this a little bit here, or actually we don't need to do anything. That's all.
Yeah, it was, again, like it was we got so lucky because we loved working with each other, and I could not imagine having had to tackle this huge of a project without Arielle. So, but we were we are working remote for the first 6 months. And so we were just in our houses, but we would pull each other up on Zoom and just keep Zoom muted and all day just have each other out. So that way it was like we were in the same room. I could just unmute and be like, hey, can you take a look at this, please? It was really
slight psychopath behavior, but we liked it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of, I think, us working so well together and this team working so well together, I think comes from everyone really having a trust in each other and a respect for each other. And like Austin mentioned, this team of producers and directors is very, very collaborative. Like everyone shares their opinions on things. Every note is worth trying. And I think we all just sort of learned to trust each other and trust the process. We had an incredible team of assistant editors that supported us throughout it. And yeah, like this type of movie was so challenging to make, and I think would have been a much, much less pleasant experience if that trust and respect wasn't there.
Yeah, of course, because without trust, what are you guys going to do? Especially on top of, because you have to have trust and honesty, because if something's not working, you want to be able to, as you said, if you're on Zoom with one another, to say, oh, can you have a look at this? Can you tell me what's going on with this scene? Does it feel like it flows right, or do you think we should just change a little section here or there? I still think it blows my mind a little bit that for the first 6 months working remotely and just sort of sitting there working on screens and not being in the presence of one another must have been so odd.
Meta.
And yeah, yeah, exactly. Guys took the word out of my mouth, but the idea of just not being there, but then also working so well together, I guess there's also, as you said, that trust and being able to sort of push on and be able to create something amazing.
Yeah, and we got really lucky too. We were working from home up until the shoot wrapped, and at that point we all moved into an office. It kind of just worked out timing wise with like where the pandemic was at. So once we were kind of like all working through the edit with the directors, we were lucky enough to all be in the same physical space. But actually, because we had spent 6 months on Zoom, like this, right? Like looking at each other eye to eye, it was kind of scary when we first met in person, because Austin is like a full foot taller than me, and we didn't realize that having been seated for 6 months. And it was like kind of an adjustment to adjust to like looking up at you.
Like, who is this? She just existed on a screen to me for 6 months, you know?
Yeah.
It was wild.
It's scary. Yeah.
That's actually quite funny. But at least that way, after that first day of working together in person, you can go out, have a beer, and be like, wow, this is actually happening now.
I'm just like touching your face, like you exist.
You're not some sort of made up screen, like a bot or something that's been created for the whole editing process.
I mean, now with all this like AI stuff, I feel like it's possible. We're getting closer to that.
Oh, the scary prospect.
Yeah, our jobs will be replaced.
No, I don't think you can. I think if anything, it will be something. Actually, I won't say because I don't want to get in trouble if I say another department. But I think with editing, it needs that human touch. You can't have an AI cut something together because it would just be too, perfect's not the right word, but it would be too, that'd make it too like packaged and polished to the point where it's like, actually, no, this is not what we need to see. We need to get that more emotional side and hold on to something more like a shot, more rather than just go cut, yeah, done, next.
For
cut,
sure,
cut, done. Especially when you've workshopped the film as well with other people. Just to go on to my final question, how have you found the reception of the film?
I mean, look, it's been so fun to finally share the movie with audiences, because it was such a long process to make this, and just countless hours of us just sitting in a room looking at a mouse and like, bevels on Chrome windows. So watching it in a theater with audiences has been some of the most like rewarding experience on this. It's just so fun to see it working and to see people reacting and gasping and being shocked and taken along for a ride. So I've been thrilled with the response.
Yeah, it's been great. Like the perfect end to this journey for us. And it is very surreal and very fun to be in a theater and hear people's reactions to something you helped, like a moment you helped create is like, wow, it makes you feel very powerful. But yeah, the film's done like really great domestically, and it's about to come out internationally in most places except for not the UK. I think it's not coming out for a while in the UK for some reason.
So the UK's got the 24th of February. When this comes out, the film will be out. But
Okay, perfect.
what I think it is because there's a delay on Oscar films and those sort of prestigious films, so they all come out in that January, February time. So I think this gets pushed a little bit longer. That's what my theory is, but I'm sure somebody who's a lot smarter and distribution savvy world will probably correct me and say that I'm completely wrong. But yeah, hopefully I'm correct. But just to sort of follow on from your answer before and say goodbye, when you're sitting there with an audience, knowing what's coming and knowing what's next, do you take your eyes off of the screen and just look at maybe the person next to you, or if you're sitting near the front and just look at what people are, what their faces are going to be like when, oh my gosh, actually this happens, or the story zigs and then it zags?
I don't know if I just like stare at people next to me because I feel like they get really freaked out, but I definitely am like watching the movie is like not even a reality for us at this point because we've just seen it thousands and thousands of times. So honestly, when I watch, I like all I'm thinking is like, okay, like this is gonna happen and then this is gonna happen. Like I'm kind of like thinking ahead as to what I'm gonna see, but it's much, much more fun to watch with people react. Like I'm always like, okay, like I know this beat is coming. I wonder if they'll laugh at it, or I wonder if they'll be scared. And like hearing, I definitely am like more attuned to how people are responding rather than like actually watching it. If anything, it's hard to turn off watching it for like, we watched it so many times to like try to catch mistakes. I find myself like watching it looking for mistakes a lot in the theater. Like just it's hard to turn that off.
Yeah, I saw it in a full audience on opening night, and I feel my blood pressure was just like so high the entire time. I was like so tense, just listening and looking around, like, is this gonna land? Is it gonna work? But it was fun. It kind of makes the experience somewhat new again, and it sort of reminds you what you spent all that time working on, which is it's good to remember that the movie does work and it is good.
Yeah. And we've had this kind of like month-long-ish run in the US, and now it's fun knowing like, okay, that's just starting now again internationally, and we'll get to kind of like have a whole new wave of people reacting to it, which is really exciting.
No, I just think the idea of that though, when you're watching is that you're saying, Austin, high blood pressure. Your friends next to you must have been like what's wrong? Like, surely you know what's coming. It's your home film.
I was sitting next to my brother and he was like eating popcorn and drinking so nonchalantly. And I was like, this big stuff is coming up. You have to pay attention.
Just like, put it down for the 1 second. Just look.
Please.
No spoilers, please. Arielle and Austin, thank you so much for your time today. Missing is out in the UK on the 24th of February. I'd like to encourage people to go see it. And I'd also like to add as well, this concludes our week on Creative Industry Insight of covering Missing. So I'd like to thank you guys for closing it out for me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
No, thank you. You guys take care, and thank you again.
Of course. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.